Daniel thought he knew Claire better than anyone until the night she vanished in the rain with 3 men no one could identify, leaving behind only a torn blouse, a polished wedding ring, and a trail of secrets darker than betrayal itself. Daniel and Claire had been married for 8 years, living in a neighborhood where the streets were lined with tall oak trees and every neighbor seemed to know each other's routines. From the outside, their life looked perfect. They had a neat 2-story home with a small garden Claire tended, and Daniel's job as a real estate agent provided them with enough income to enjoy occasional vacations and a comfortable lifestyle. But the truth was far from what anyone imagined. Daniel's career meant he was often gone for long hours, sometimes leaving the house before dawn and returning after the sun had set. He told himself it was all for their future, to secure a life without financial worry. Claire, however, felt the hours stretch endlessly, the walls of their home closing in on her as each day passed without excitement. What began as simple boredom grew into something more dangerous when she started craving attention that Daniel could no longer give. Her first step toward that craving was joining a gym. She told Daniel it was for health, to stay active, but it quickly became something else. The gym's atmosphere was alive with energy, music, movement, and strangers offering small compliments that made her feel noticed. That was where she met Aaron, a tall, athletic trainer with a confident smile. It began innocently, casual conversations during workouts, but Claire found herself staying after her sessions, chatting longer, watching the clock less. Aaron made her feel desired, like the center of someone's focus, something Daniel hadn't done in years. At first, she told herself it was harmless, but soon she was arranging her gym schedule to match his shifts, ensuring their paths crossed almost daily. A few months later, during the quiet of the pandemic, Claire joined an online community for cooking enthusiasts. She enjoyed the distraction, posting pictures of recipes and commenting on others' creations. That was how she connected with Michael, a man living in another state. He was charming in his messages, quick with compliments, and attentive to her every word. Their conversations moved from food to personal matters, and Claire began looking forward to his messages more than anything else in her day. It was easy to keep Michael a secret. He lived far away, and their interactions were all online. Still, his attention became another addiction, one she guarded as carefully as her meetings with Aaron. The third man entered her life in the most unexpected way through her own neighborhood. Josh lived only a few houses down, married with 2 young children. His wife was often away visiting family, and Claire would see him outside working on his lawn or fixing something in his garage. Small talk turned into longer exchanges, and soon Josh began dropping by under the pretense of borrowing tools or offering to help with minor repairs. Claire noticed the way his eyes lingered on her, and she didn't discourage it. Their connection grew quietly, unnoticed by others, but dangerously close to home. It was reckless, but that was part of the thrill. Claire became an expert at balancing her double life. With Daniel gone most of the time, she had the freedom to meet Aaron under the guise of extra workouts, to chat with Michael late into the night while pretending she was reading, and to spend afternoons with Josh while Daniel was out showing properties. She convinced herself that she could control everything, that each man was separate, and none would ever find out about the others. She told each of them what they wanted to hear, feeding their attention and affection just enough to keep them invested without asking too many questions. But with every secret meeting and every hidden message, the stakes grew higher. Claire thrived on the rush of it all, the stolen moments, the thrill of not getting caught, but she failed to see how thin the ice beneath her had become. She underestimated how deeply each man's emotions ran and how dangerous it could be to juggle the affections of 3 men at once. Each relationship was a ticking clock, and the more time passed, the louder those clocks seemed to tick. It began with small oversights. Aaron once mentioned something to her that she had only told Michael, and she laughed it off, saying she must have mentioned it by accident. Josh noticed her distracted during one of his visits, her attention clearly elsewhere, and she quickly changed the subject. Michael began asking about the background noise he sometimes heard during their late-night calls, noises that didn't match the story she gave about being alone. Claire thought she could smooth over each moment, but every cover-up left behind a loose thread. The threads were beginning to tangle. Daniel, meanwhile, remained mostly unaware. He had always trusted Claire, and though he noticed she seemed more energetic lately, he believed it was the result of her gym routine and new hobbies. But one evening, he came home earlier than expected and found her phone on the kitchen counter unlocked. The screen showed a message preview from an unknown contact. It was short but strange, just a time and an address. Before he could read more, Claire appeared and quickly took the phone, smiling in a way that felt a little forced. Daniel let it go, but something about that moment stuck with him. The truth was, Daniel wasn't the only one noticing changes. The neighbor's wife had begun to suspect something after overhearing Claire and Josh talking in the driveway. Aaron had grown more possessive, asking why Claire kept canceling sessions at the last minute. Michael had started pressing her to visit him in person, tired of their relationship being confined to screens. All three men, in their own ways, began to feel that they weren't the only ones in her life. Each suspicion planted a seed of resentment, and resentment, when nurtured by jealousy, can grow into something dangerous. Claire had no idea that her carefully balanced secret world was already on the verge of collapsing. She believed she could handle the small cracks appearing in her story, patching them up as she went along. But in reality, every lie she told, every excuse she made, only drew the three men closer together in a shared sense of betrayal. Somewhere in the background of her life, unseen and unheard, a chain of events was beginning to form, events that would soon pull all of them into a situation none of them could escape from. By the time Claire noticed the first real warning sign, it was already too late. Daniel began noticing little things that didn't quite fit into the life he thought he knew. At first, they were small enough to ignore: a few late nights when Claire claimed she was visiting a friend, grocery receipts from stores they never shopped at, the faint smell of cologne that wasn't his. He told himself there was a logical explanation for all of it, but the unease lingered, quietly gnawing at the edges of his thoughts. One afternoon, while reviewing the monthly bank statement, something finally caught his attention. There were multiple small withdrawals from their joint account, each from different parts of town. Claire explained them away as household errands, things she needed for the house, but the numbers didn't match the story. The amounts were too irregular, and some of the locations didn't make sense for what she claimed to be buying. Around the same time, other cracks began forming, ones Daniel didn't yet see. The neighbor's wife had grown suspicious of Josh's unusual behavior. He was suddenly spending more time outside, lingering around the street when Claire was home alone, and taking unexplained walks that always seemed to pass by the Daniels' house. Her instincts told her something wasn't right, and she began quietly watching from her windows, taking note of the times Josh would disappear into Claire's home. She didn't have proof, but her suspicion hardened into certainty. Aaron, the gym trainer, was also beginning to sense something. Claire had started canceling their sessions at the last minute, sometimes not even bothering to reschedule. When they did meet, her focus seemed elsewhere, her eyes darting to her phone more than to him. His easy confidence began to sour into frustration. In the weeks before, he had believed their connection was unique. Now, he wasn't so sure. The compliments she once showered him with had grown scarce, replaced by vague excuses and distractions. Michael, hundreds of miles away, noticed his own set of changes. She used to reply to his messages instantly, eager to share details of her day, but lately her responses came hours later. When they spoke on the phone, there was often background noise she couldn't explain: a muffled voice, the slam of a car door, or music that didn't match the story she gave about staying home. Michael's affection for her was still strong, but his trust was slipping. He began to imagine scenarios, none of them flattering, and the more he thought about it, the angrier he became. The tension was spreading like an invisible web, connecting people who didn't even know each other yet. Each man began to feel the same things: jealousy, suspicion, and the creeping realization that Claire wasn't entirely theirs. None of them had the full picture, but they didn't need it to know that something was wrong. Claire was skilled at telling each man what he wanted to hear, smoothing over their doubts with just enough charm to keep them hooked. But those reassurances didn't erase their growing questions. Daniel's turning point came on a quiet Thursday evening. He arrived home earlier than expected after a canceled meeting and found Claire's purse sitting on the counter. As he walked past, he noticed the corner of an envelope sticking out. He didn't mean to pry, but curiosity got the better of him. Inside was a folded note, written in hurried handwriting he didn't recognize. There was no name, no signature, only a short message: "I know everything, and you regret it." His pulse quickened as he read the words again. It didn't sound like a joke. It didn't sound like something meant for him either. When Claire walked into the room moments later, she snatched the purse without looking at him, her movements sharp and deliberate. Daniel said nothing that night, but his mind wouldn't rest. He replayed every strange moment from the past few months, trying to connect them. The unexplained withdrawals, the unfamiliar scents, the guarded way she kept her phone close, it all began to form a troubling picture. He considered confronting her, but something inside told him to wait, to watch a little longer. If something was happening, he wanted to know for sure before he acted. Meanwhile, outside of Daniel's awareness, the three men in Claire's secret life were each reaching a breaking point. Josh was growing careless, his visits to Claire's house becoming more frequent and harder to hide. The neighbor's wife had begun keeping a record of his movements, writing down dates and times. Aaron's frustration had turned into determination. He decided to find out why Claire had grown distant, even if it meant following her after the gym. Michael, feeling powerless from afar, began pressing Claire harder to visit him, threatening to cut off contact if she didn't commit to a plan. Claire was losing control of the careful balance she had maintained for so long. She had built her secret life like a house of cards, each lie supporting the next, but now the wind was starting to blow. She tried to keep up the act, giving each man just enough attention to hold them in place, but the gaps in her stories were widening. Where she once felt the thrill of juggling them, she now felt the weight of keeping them all from finding out about each other. She didn't realize that their suspicions were already pushing them toward the truth, each from a different direction. The note Daniel found wasn't the only warning. 2 days later, Claire returned from running errands to find a single red rose lying on the doorstep. There was no note this time, but the gesture felt strange, almost mocking. She looked up and down the street, but no one was there. She told herself it was nothing, maybe even meant for someone else, but the uneasy feeling stayed with her all night. Her situation had shifted from one of control to one of fear, though she wouldn't admit it. She still believed she could talk her way out of anything if the truth came close to the surface. But she underestimated the danger of dealing with three men who each felt deceived. Trust, once broken, doesn't fade quietly, it festers. And in this case, it was festering in 3 different hearts at once. Daniel's suspicion was no longer a quiet thought in the back of his mind. It had grown into a constant hum, coloring every interaction with Claire. He began watching her more closely, noting the way she guarded her phone, how she often disappeared into another room to take calls, how her explanations for errands seemed rehearsed. He didn't have the proof he needed, but he was getting closer. Somewhere among the growing tension, an unseen decision was made. Whether it came from jealousy, anger, or a desire for revenge, one of the men in Claire's life began to set a plan in motion. The warning note had been just the beginning, and soon, the lines between suspicion and action would blur. By the time Daniel realized the storm was about to break, it would already be too late to stop it. The weeks that followed were marked by a growing sense of unease, not only for Daniel but for the 3 men whose lives Claire had entangled. Each of them, in his own way, was edging closer to the truth, and every new clue fueled a dangerous mix of jealousy and resentment. Claire didn't realize it yet, but the separate compartments she had so carefully built were starting to merge. Her secrets were bleeding into each other, and soon, the people she thought she could control would no longer be willing to play along. It started with Josh, the married neighbor. His wife's suspicion had escalated to confrontation, and after a heated argument one evening, Josh admitted to seeing Claire. He didn't go into detail, but the truth was enough to ignite his wife's fury. She slammed the door on him and, in her anger, made a call to a mutual friend, one who happened to know Aaron from the gym. Within days, Aaron heard about Claire's connection to a married man living right next door to her. The information burned in his mind. He had suspected for weeks that something was wrong, but now he knew for certain that Claire was seeing someone else. Aaron's reaction wasn't quiet. He confronted Claire at the gym, asking direct questions she couldn't easily dodge. Her calm mask slipped for the first time, and she left without finishing her workout. That might have been the end of it, but Aaron's frustration drove him to dig deeper. He searched her social media, scrolled through old photos, and paid closer attention to her online activity. That's when he stumbled onto a picture that stopped him cold, a photo of Claire cooking in her kitchen, posted months earlier. In the background, barely noticeable, was a reflection in a glass cabinet door. It wasn't him. It wasn't Josh. It was a man he didn't recognize at first, but a quick reverse image search of the face revealed Michael's profile picture from an online forum. Michael, unaware of Aaron's discovery, was dealing with his own growing anger. He had been pressing Claire for weeks to come visit him, but she kept finding excuses to delay the trip. One night, during a video call, he noticed the faint sound of a man's voice in the background. When he asked about it, Claire claimed it was the television, but Michael didn't believe her. He began doing his own searching, combing through her old posts and cross-referencing them with other public accounts. That's when he found Aaron's profile, a collection of photos featuring the gym Claire attended, with Claire herself appearing in a few group shots. It was undeniable. The realization that they had all been deceived struck each man like a personal betrayal. What made it worse was that none of them could claim to be the only victim. Claire had played them all, weaving a web of lies that now trapped each of them together. But instead of confronting her individually, a different idea began to take shape, one that involved all three of them. Their first indirect connection came through Aaron, who sent a message to Michael, pretending to be a concerned friend. He revealed just enough information to pique Michael's interest without giving away his own involvement. Michael responded cautiously at first, but once he realized Aaron was another man Claire had been seeing, the floodgates opened. They exchanged details, timelines, and even photos, piecing together just how far Claire's deceit had gone. Josh entered the mix when Aaron, curious to confirm the rumor, began showing up in Claire's neighborhood at odd hours. He spotted Josh leaving her house one afternoon, their body language speaking volumes. That was enough to confirm it. The three men, now fully aware of each other, began communicating in secret. Their conversations were laced with bitterness, each man venting about the lies he had been fed. But beneath the anger was something darker, a shared desire to make Claire pay for what she had done. Claire sensed something had shifted. The tone of her interactions with each man had changed. Aaron was curt, Michael was demanding, and Josh was more possessive than ever. The balance she once enjoyed was gone. She felt surrounded by tension but couldn't pinpoint exactly what was happening. She told herself she could still manage it, that she had talked her way out of worse situations. But this was different. This time, the men weren't just suspicious, they were working together, and she didn't know it. Daniel remained on the outside of this growing conspiracy, still trying to piece together the fragments of suspicion in his own mind. He noticed Claire was more distracted than usual, her phone glued to her hand, her eyes darting when messages came in. The unexplained absences continued, and the gap between them widened. He wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation, but the memory of that threatening note lingered. He had no idea that the note was only the beginning. The three men's plan wasn't fully formed yet, but it was moving in a clear direction. They began sharing information about Claire's schedule, tracking her movements, and comparing stories to catch her in lies. Aaron provided details about her gym visits, Michael tracked her online activity, and Josh kept tabs on her at home. Each update only fueled their collective anger, and their conversations started to drift from sharing information to discussing consequences. One evening, while Claire was out, Daniel found himself drawn again to the envelope he had hidden away in his desk, the one with the note that had started his suspicions. He stared at it, wondering if it was time to confront her directly. But before he could make a decision, the phone rang. It was an unknown number. When he answered, there was only silence on the other end, followed by the faint sound of breathing. Then the line went dead. That same night, the three men met in person for the first time. It was in the back corner of a quiet bar, away from prying eyes. Their initial conversation was tense, each sizing up the others, but it quickly shifted into a mutual understanding. They didn't need to be friends to have a shared goal. Claire had lied to all of them, manipulated their feelings, and now they had the opportunity to turn the tables. The details of what they discussed would never be known to anyone outside that booth, but one thing was certain: by the time they left, each man knew exactly what role he would play in what was to come. Claire's life, once carefully divided into separate compartments, was now on the verge of colliding in the worst possible way. She didn't know it yet, but the people she had once controlled were no longer playing her game. They had built one of their own, and she was no longer the one holding the pieces. When the first step of their plan unfolded, it would happen quietly, without warning, and without giving Claire any chance to protect herself. The only question was how far they were willing to go to make sure she paid for everything she had done. The rain had been falling since early afternoon, steady and cold, turning the streets into dark, glistening ribbons under the streetlights. Daniel pulled into the driveway just after 7, tired from a long day, but the sight that greeted him made his fatigue vanish. The front door was slightly open. A faint draft moved through the crack, carrying with it the smell of damp air and something sharper, an unfamiliar mix of perfume and sweat. His first thought was that Claire had left in a hurry, maybe to run an errand, but as he stepped inside, the house felt wrong. The lights were on in the living room, but everything was still, as if the place was holding its breath. He called out for Claire, but the only answer was the steady patter of rain against the windows. He moved through the downstairs rooms, each one appearing untouched, but his instincts told him he wasn't alone. Upstairs, the hallway was dim except for a thin line of light spilling from the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar, and the sound of water dripping echoed against the tiled walls. When he pushed it open, the first thing he noticed was Claire's phone on the floor, its screen cracked, still lit with a missed call from an unknown number. A shattered perfume bottle lay in the sink, its sharp scent filling the air. The mirror was streaked as if someone had wiped it aggressively, smearing condensation into long, chaotic lines. Claire was nowhere to be seen. Daniel's heart pounded as he searched the rest of the house. The bedroom closet was open, clothes pulled from hangers and tossed onto the floor. In the corner near the bed, he saw a single high heel lying on its side, as if dropped during a struggle. The unease building in his chest turned to cold fear. He grabbed his phone to call the police, but before he could dial, a movement outside caught his eye. Through the rain-blurred window, he saw 3 figures walking away from the house. They moved quickly, their heads down, each wearing dark hoodies pulled low over their faces. The rain made it hard to see clearly, but something about their purposeful stride made his stomach tighten. The police arrived within minutes, their presence filling the house with the sound of boots on hardwood and low, urgent voices. They combed through the rooms, photographing the scene and asking Daniel to recount everything he had seen. When he mentioned the 3 figures, one officer stepped outside to search the neighborhood, but the rain had already washed away any clear tracks. The neighbors were questioned, and one woman claimed she'd seen 3 men earlier that evening, walking up to the Daniels' front door. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, assuming they were friends or delivery workers. Inside the house, the investigators focused on the bathroom, where the signs of a struggle were most apparent. The cracked phone, the broken perfume bottle, and a faint smear of something dark on the edge of the sink suggested violence. The substance was collected for testing, but the results would take time. The police asked Daniel if anyone might have wanted to harm Claire, but he struggled to answer. Until recently, he would have said no without hesitation. But now, with the strange note in his possession and the memory of her growing distance, he wasn't sure. The search for Claire began that night, officers fanning out through the wet streets and nearby wooded areas. Daniel stayed behind, sitting in the living room while crime scene technicians moved in and out of the house. His mind spun in circles, replaying the last few weeks, the note, the unanswered questions, the way Claire had guarded her phone. He couldn't shake the image of the 3 hooded figures disappearing into the rain. What Daniel didn't know was that earlier that same day, the 3 men Aaron, Michael, and Josh had put the next part of their plan into action. Their meeting at the bar had solidified their intentions, and now the opportunity had arrived. They had coordinated their movements carefully, each man assigned a role. Josh, with his knowledge of the neighborhood, knew when Daniel would be gone and when Claire would be alone. Aaron, strong and imposing, would ensure control if things turned physical. Michael, distant but calculated, had arranged for transportation and a place to go afterward that no one would think to check. Claire had been at home when the first knock came. Seeing Josh at the door wasn't unusual, and she let him in without hesitation. Moments later, Aaron stepped into the hallway, dripping from the rain. Claire's shock was immediate, but before she could speak, Michael appeared from the shadows just outside the door. The confrontation escalated quickly. Each man had his grievances, each one demanding answers, their voices growing sharper as the accusations flew. Claire tried to calm them, spinning new lies in a desperate attempt to regain control, but the anger in the room was too strong. The tension broke into chaos: shouts, movement, the crash of the perfume bottle, the thud of something heavy hitting the wall. The details of what happened next would remain known only to the men in that room. But when it was over, Claire was no longer in the house. Whether she left on her own or was forced out, no one could say for certain. The men left quickly, their steps muffled by the rain, their faces hidden. By the time Daniel arrived, the confrontation was over, leaving only the remnants of the struggle behind. As the investigation continued into the night, the police pieced together what little they had. Witnesses described seeing the men, but couldn't identify them. Security cameras in the area were checked, but the rain and darkness obscured the footage. The only solid clue was Claire's phone, now in police custody, its last call coming from a prepaid number with no registration. Daniel spent the next hours answering questions, his responses halting as he tried to protect the image of the wife he thought he knew while wrestling with the suspicion that she had been hiding something serious. When the officers finally left, the house felt emptier than ever. The scent of the broken perfume still lingered, mixing with the dampness from the open door. Somewhere in the city, far from the flashing lights of police cars, 3 men sat in silence. They didn't speak about what had happened or where Claire was now. Their alliance had been born from betrayal, but in the aftermath, there was no sense of victory, only a shared knowledge of what they had done and an unspoken agreement to keep it between them. By morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets washed clean, but inside Daniel's home, nothing felt cleansed. The unanswered questions hung heavy in the air, and the search for Claire was only beginning. The morning after Claire's disappearance brought a strange stillness to the neighborhood. The streets were wet but quiet, as if the storm had swept away more than just leaves and debris. Police cruisers returned just after sunrise, their engines low and steady, officers stepping out with the same deliberate movements they had shown the night before. They weren't there for another sweep of the house. This time, they came with questions sharpened overnight. Daniel, still in the same clothes he had worn yesterday, opened the door to their serious faces. Sleep hadn't come to him, and the shadows under his eyes told the story. The lead detective informed him they had managed to recover partial surveillance footage from a gas station less than a mile from the house. The footage showed a dark SUV pulling in at around 7:15 p.m., just minutes after the time Daniel had spotted the 3 hooded figures leaving his property. The vehicle stopped only long enough for the passenger door to open and someone to get inside. Someone small in stature, head lowered, hair damp from the rain. The figure could have been Claire, but the poor quality of the image left room for doubt. The SUV then drove away toward the industrial district on the edge of town. That lead set the pace for the day. Officers traced the vehicle to a rental agency, but the paperwork listed a false name and an address that didn't exist. What it did reveal, however, was that the rental had been paid for in cash. The agency's security footage showed 3 men arriving together to pick it up, all wearing caps pulled low over their faces. Even with their precautions, their body language and build matched Daniel's description from the night before. Daniel felt the ground beneath him shift with each revelation. If Claire had been taken against her will, these men were dangerous and calculated. If she had gone willingly, it meant she had been keeping secrets far darker than an affair. The note he had found weeks earlier took on new weight, its vague threat now a shadow stretching across every unanswered question. Detectives began digging into Claire's recent life, her credit card records, bank statements, and phone history. They found a pattern: unexplained cash withdrawals, burner phone numbers saved under generic labels, and hotel stays during times Daniel thought she was visiting friends. Each detail pointed toward a separate life, one that intersected with these 3 men in ways no one could fully explain. By late afternoon, the investigation led police to an abandoned warehouse in the industrial district. The SUV from the footage was found inside, its tires slick with mud, the windows tinted so dark it was impossible to see inside without opening the doors. A thorough search revealed no sign of Claire, but they did find strands of hair matching her color on the back seat, along with a torn piece of fabric from what could have been her blouse. The warehouse itself was otherwise empty, its echoing walls offering no clues about where she had gone next. Meanwhile, the 3 men remained ghosts. No official records, no recent employment histories, and no fixed addresses surfaced. It was as if they had been moving through the city unseen until the night they stepped into Daniel's life. The only break came when an officer recognized one of them, Aaron, from an old arrest record tied to assault charges in another state. The charges had been dropped, but the incident involved a woman, an argument, and a violent confrontation. This history only deepened the sense of danger surrounding the case. Days passed, and the media caught hold of the story. The headline about a missing wife and 3 mysterious men spread quickly, painting Claire as either a victim or a willing participant in her own disappearance. Daniel found himself under a microscope, reporters crowding the edge of his driveway, speculating on his marriage and personal life. He refused interviews, choosing instead to cooperate quietly with the police. Then, on the 5th day, something unexpected happened. A small package arrived at the police station with no return address. Inside was Claire's wedding ring, cleaned and polished, resting in a clear plastic bag. Alongside it was a single photograph: Claire, sitting in what looked like a dimly lit room, her expression unreadable, eyes staring directly into the camera. The background was bare concrete, a single metal chair beside her. No date, no writing, no demands. The photograph was chilling not because she looked hurt, but because she looked calm to calm for someone who might be in danger. For investigators, the message was unclear. Was this proof she was alive and being held somewhere, or a signal that she had chosen to leave her old life behind? The calmness in her face hinted at complicity, but the deliberate act of sending the ring back suggested finality. Daniel stared at the photograph for a long time, unable to reconcile the woman he saw with the one he thought he knew. Search efforts expanded beyond the city, focusing on rural properties linked to Aaron's old acquaintances. Abandoned houses, farm buildings, and storage units were checked, but none showed signs of her presence. Every time the trail seemed to warm, it went cold again. The three men were always one step ahead, if they were even still together. Weeks turned into a month. Without new leads, the official search began to slow, resources shifting toward fresher cases. Daniel was left in a strange limbo, grieving a wife who might still be alive, questioning whether she had been taken from him or had walked out willingly. His home became a monument to uncertainty, each untouched item a reminder of her absence. Then, in the early hours of a rainy Thursday morning, Daniel's phone rang. The number was blocked. He answered, but no one spoke. There was only the faint sound of breathing on the other end, followed by a click as the call ended. The police traced it, but could only confirm it had come from a public phone near a bus station 2 towns away. Surveillance footage from that area showed a hooded figure using the phone before walking away and disappearing into the crowd. The figure's build could have been any of the three men or Claire herself. The case never reached a clear conclusion. Claire was never found, dead or alive. The three men vanished from any official trace, their images burned into grainy surveillance footage and the edges of Daniel's memory. The photograph of Claire and the returned wedding ring remained the last tangible evidence of her existence. For Daniel, the absence was worse than an answer. The story didn't end with justice or reunion. It simply faded into an open wound, a puzzle missing too many pieces to ever be solved. In the years that followed, rumors surfaced, sightings of Claire in distant cities, whispers of her under a different name, unconfirmed reports of the three men running schemes in other states. None of these leads could be proven. The truth about what happened after that rainy night became a matter of speculation, retold in countless versions, each one darker than the last. And so the story lingered, suspended between love and betrayal, crime and choice, a reminder that not all mysteries are solved. Some live on in the spaces between facts, in the quiet moments when the phone rings unexpectedly, or when a face in a crowd feels too familiar to ignore. For Daniel, the only certainty was that the woman he once loved had crossed a line he could never follow, leaving behind a life that would never again feel whole.